Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Faith, Power, and Emancipation. My name is Professor Januarius Asongu, and once again, thanks for joining me as we continue our journey through this book. This is the last chapter of the book, and today marks a significant milestone in our series. Over the past 13 episodes, we have walked together through every major section of this book. We began by laying the philosophical and theological foundations for liberation. Then we examined the changing nature of empire and power. We explored the ethics of resistance. We reflected on the importance of building institutions before political victory. And finally, we considered how nations themselves can pursue justice while navigating an increasingly complex geopolitical world. All of those discussions have been leading us to this moment. Today, we begin part five, the final section of the book. This concluding section contains just one chapter because it brings together everything we have learned throughout the series. Our focus today is chapter 13, Liberative Realism Towards an Ethics of Responsible Liberation. This chapter asks perhaps the most important question of the entire book. If liberation theology must evolve, what should it become? That question has guided my work for many years. I have never believed that liberation theology should be abandoned. On the contrary, I believe it remains one of the most important theological developments of the 20th century. Liberation theology reminded the church that God hears the cries of the poor. It reminded Christians that faith cannot remain indifferent to oppression. It restored the prophetic conscience of the gospel. Those achievements must never be forgotten. In fact, they should be celebrated. Yet, history has also revealed certain limitations. Some liberation movements underestimated the complexity of power. Others neglected institution building. Some relied too heavily upon ideological frameworks that ultimately proved inadequate. Many struggles to explain why revolutions so often replaced one form of domination with another. These realities do not invalidate liberation theology. They invite its development. And that is the task that I took upon myself to do. That development is what I call liberative realism. Liberative realism is not just a rejection of liberation theology. It is not. It is its maturation. Throughout this series, I have introduced four interconnected ideas. The first is critical synthetic realism. This provides the philosophical foundation. Reality exists independently of our opinions. Truth is objective, even though our understanding of it remains incomplete and open to correction. The second is synthetic theological realism. Here, theology enters the conversation. Christian faith must remain faithful both to divine revelation and to the realities of history. Theology cannot become detached from either truth or human experience. The third stage is critical liberative theology. This preserves the prophetic concerns of justice while insisting that liberation must remain accountable to truth, moral responsibility, and intellectual humility. Finally, these three foundations converge in realism. Liberative realism asks a remarkably simple question. How do we pursue liberation without creating new forms of oppression? That question changes everything because it reminds us that the struggle is not simply against injustice, it is also against the human temptation to misuse power. One of the central convictions of this chapter is that liberation is never complete. Every generation faces new forms of domination. Every society confronts new temptations. Freedom, therefore, cannot be understood as a final destination. It is an ongoing moral responsibility. This insight reflects something deeply Christian. The Christian life itself is not a single moment of conversion, it is a lifelong journey of growth. The same is true of societies. Justice is never permanently secured. Democracy is never permanently guaranteed. Human dignity is never permanently protected. Every generation must choose truth again. Every generation must defend freedom again. Every generation must rebuild institutions again. That is why liberative realism rejects political perfectionism. There will never be a perfect government. There will never be a perfect constitution. There will never be a perfect political ideology. Human beings remain finite. Human beings remain morally fallible. Therefore, every institution must remain open to correction. Every leader must remain accountable. Every society must remain teachable. Humanity is not the enemy of justice. Humanity is one of its greatest safeguards. This chapter also emphasizes something we have encountered repeatedly throughout the book. Liberation must always remain grounded in truth. Without truth, justice becomes ideology, freedom becomes manipulation, politics becomes propaganda. And that is why I believe the struggle for truth is itself a liberative act. To tell the truth about history, to tell the truth about oppression, to tell the truth about ourselves, these become acts of moral responsibility. Truth is not opposed to liberation. Truth makes liberation possible. Liberative realism also expands our understanding of responsibility. Responsibility belongs not only to governments, it belongs to citizens, to churches, universities, families, journalists, teachers, business leaders, to every person who exercises influence over others. Freedom survives only when responsibility becomes widely shared. This vision also changes the way we understand power. Power is not merely something possessed by presidents or kings. Parents exercise power, teachers exercise power, pastors exercise power, professors exercise power, managers exercise power, writers exercise power. Every human relationship contains some dimension of influence. The real question is therefore not whether we possess power, the question is whether we exercise it responsibly. This is why liberative realism is ultimately an ethic. It asks every one of us, how do we use the influence entrusted to us? Do we promote truth? Do we strengthen institutions? Do we cultivate trust? Do we defend human dignity? Do we encourage dialogue? Do we exercise humility? These questions extend far beyond politics. They become questions about the moral quality of everyday life. Perhaps the most important contribution of this chapter is its understanding of hope. Hope is not optimism. Optimism assumes everything will work out. Hope is different. Hope works even when success is uncertain. Hope continues building institutions when progress is slow. Hope continues, telling the truth even when lies appear more successful. Hope continues defending human dignity even when injustice seems overwhelming. Hope is disciplined perseverance. That is the hope reflected in liberative realism, not naive optimism, not cynical resignation, but faithful responsibility. As we approach the end of this book, I hope one idea remains above all others. Liberation is not simply about overthrowing oppression. It is about creating societies where truth can flourish, where institutions remain accountable, where power serves rather than dominates. where every human being is treated with dignity, and where freedom becomes sustainable across generations. That ultimately is the vision of liberative realism. It is both philosophical and theological, both realistic and hopeful, both critical and constructive. It invites us not merely to criticize the world we have inherited, it calls us to become responsible builders of a better one. Thank you for joining me for this episode 14 of faith, power, and emancipation. In our next and final episode, we will reflect on the conclusion, liberative realism and the discipline of freedom. If you found today's discussion helpful, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with others, and leave a comment. If you would like to buy this book, you can find it at asongubooks.com or Amazon. Until next time, may God bless you.